Crowd manipulation is the intentional use of techniques based on the principles of crowd psychology to engage, control, or influence the desires of a crowd in order to direct its behavior toward a specific action. This practice is common to politics and business and can facilitate the approval or disapproval or indifference to a person, policy, or product. The ethicality of crowd manipulation is commonly questioned. Crowd manipulation differs from propaganda, although they may reinforce one another to produce a desired result. If propaganda is the consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea or group, crowd manipulation is the relatively brief call to action once the seeds of propaganda are sown and the public is organized into a crowd. The propagandist appeals to the masses, even if compartmentalized, whereas the crowd manipulator appeals to a segment of the masses assembled into a crowd in real time. In situations such as a national emergency, however, a crowd manipulator may leverage mass media to address the masses in real time as if speaking to a crowd. Crowd manipulation also differs from crowd control, which serves a security function. Local authorities use crowd control methods to contain and disperse crowds and to prevent and respond to unruly and unlawful acts such as rioting and looting. Function and morality. The crowd manipulator engages, controls, or influences crowds without the use of physical force, although his goal may be to instigate the use of force by the crowd or by local authorities. Prior to the American War of Independence, Samuel Adams provided Bostonians with elaborate costumes, props, and musical instruments to lead protest songs in harborside demonstrations and parades through Boston's streets, if such crowds provoked British authorities to violence, as they did during the Boston Massacre on March 5, 1770. Adams would write, produce, and disperse sensationalized accounts of the incidents to stir discontent and create unity among the American colonies. The American way of manipulation may be classified as a tool of soft power, which is the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payments. Harvard professor Joseph Nye coined the term in the 1980s, although he did not create the concept. The techniques used to win the minds of crowds were examined and developed notably by Quintilian in his training book, Institutia Oratoria, and by Aristotle in Rhetoric. Known origins of crowd manipulation go as far back as the 5th century BC, where litigants in Syracuse sought to improve their persuasiveness in court. The verb manipulate can convey negativity, but it does not have to do so. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, for example, to manipulate means to control or play upon by artful, unfair, or insidious means, especially to one's own advantage. This definition allows, then, for the artful and honest use of control for one's advantage. Moreover, the actions of a crowd need not be criminal in nature. 19th-century social scientist Gustave Le Bon wrote, "It is crowds rather than isolated individuals that may be induced to run the risk of death to secure the triumph of a creed or an idea, that may be fired with enthusiasm for glory and honor, that are led on almost without bread and without arms, as in the age of the Crusades to deliver the tomb of Christ from the infidel, or, as in 1793, to defend the fatherland." Such heroism is without doubt somewhat unconscious, but it is of such heroism that history is made. Were peoples only to be credited with the great actions performed in cold blood, the annals of the world would register but few of them. Edward Bernays, the so-called father of public relations, believed that public manipulation was not only moral, but a necessity. He argued that a small, invisible government who understands the mental processes and social patterns of the masses rules public opinion by consent. This is necessary for the division of labor and to prevent chaos and confusion. The voice of the people expresses the mind of the people, and that mind is made up for it by the group leaders in whom it believes and by those persons who understand the manipulation of public opinion, wrote Bernays. He also wrote, "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized." Others argue that some techniques are not inherently evil, but instead are philosophically neutral vehicles. Lifelong political activist and former Ronald Reagan White House staffer Morton C. Blackwell explained in a speech titled, "People, Parties, and Power, being right in the sense of being correct is not sufficient to win. Political technology determines political success. Learn how to organize and how to communicate. Most political technology is philosophically neutral. You owe it to your philosophy to study how to win." In brief, manipulators with different ideologies can employ successfully the same techniques to achieve ends that may be good or bad. Crowd manipulation techniques offers individuals and groups a philosophically neutral means to maximize the effect of their messages. In order to manipulate a crowd, one should first understand what is meant by a crowd, as well as the principles that govern its behavior. Crowds and the behavior. The word crowd, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, refers to both a large number of persons, especially when collected together, and a group of people having something in common, as in a habit, interest, or occupation. Philosopher G.A. Tawney defined a crowd as a numerous collection of people who face a concrete situation together and are more or less aware of their bodily existence. As a group, their facing the situation together is due to common interests and the existence of common circumstances which give a single direction to their thoughts and actions. Tawney discussed in his work, The Nature of Crowds, two main types of crowds. Crowds may be classified according to the degree of definiteness and constancy of this consciousness. When it is very definite and constant, the crowd may be called homogeneous, and when not so definite and constant, heterogeneous. All mobs belong to the homogeneous class, but not all homogeneous crowds are mobs. Whether a given crowd belong to the one group or the other may be a debatable question, and the same crowd may imperceptibly pass from one to the other. In a 2001 study, the Institute for Non-Lethal Defense Studies at Pennsylvania State University defined a crowd more specifically as a gathering of a multitude of individuals and small groups that have temporarily assembled. These small groups are usually comprised of friends, family members, or acquaintances. A crowd may display behavior that differs from the individuals who compose it. Several theories have emerged in the 19th century and early 20th century to explain this phenomenon. These collective works contribute to the classic theory of crowd psychology. In 1968, however, social scientist Carl Couch of the University of Liverpool refuted many of the stereotypes associated with crowd behavior as described by classic theory. His criticisms are supported widely in the psychology community but are still being incorporated as a modern theory into psychological texts. A modern model, based on the individualistic concept of crowd behavior developed by Floyd Allport in 1924, is the elaborated social identity model. Classic theory. French philosopher and historian Hippolyte Taine provided in the wake of the Franco-Prussian War of 1871 the first modern account of crowd psychology. Gustave Le Bon developed this framework in his 1895 book, Psychologie des Foules. He proposed that French crowds during the 19th century were essentially excitable, irrational mobs easily influenced by wrongdoers. He postulated that the heterogeneous elements which make up this type of crowd essentially form a new being, a chemical reaction of sorts in which the crowd's properties change. He wrote, "Under certain given circumstances, and only under those circumstances, an agglomeration of men presents new characteristics very different from those of the individuals composing it. The sentiments and ideas of all the persons in the gathering take one and the same direction, and their conscious personality vanishes. A collective mind is formed, doubtless transitory, but presenting very clearly defined characteristics. Le Bon observed several characteristics of what he called the organized, or psychological, crowd, including submergence or the disappearance of a conscious personality and the appearance of an unconscious personality. This process is aided by sentiments of invincible power and anonymity which allow one to yield to instincts which he would have kept under restraint, contagion, and suggestibility as the result of a hypnotic state. All feelings and thoughts are bent in the direction determined by the hypnotizer, and the crowd tends to turn these thoughts into acts. In sum, the classic theory contends that crowds are unified masses whose behaviors can be categorized as active, expressive, acquisitive or hostile. Crowd participants are given to spontaneity, irrationality, loss of self-control, and a sense of anonymity. Modern theory critics of the classic theory contend that it is seriously flawed in that it decontextualizes crowd behavior, lacks sustainable empirical support, is biased, and ignores the influence of policing measures on the behavior of the crowd. In 1968, Dr. Carl J. Couch examined and refuted many classic theory stereotypes in his article, Collective Behavior, an examination of some stereotypes. Since then, other social scientists have validated much of his critique. Knowledge from these studies of crowd psychology indicate that crowds are not homogeneous entities but are composed of a minority of individuals and a majority of small groups of people who are acquainted with one another. Crowd participants are neither unanimous in their motivation, nor to one another. Participants seldom act in unison, and if they do, that action does not last long. Crowds do not cripple individual cognition, and are not uniquely distinguished by violence or disorderly actions. Individual attitudes and personality characteristics, as well as socio-economic, demographic and political variables are poor predictors of riot intensity and individual participation. According to the aforementioned 2001 study conducted by Penn State University's Institute for Non-Lethal Defense Technologies, crowds undergo a process that has a beginning, middle, and ending phase. Specifically, the assembling process. This phase includes the temporary assembly of individuals for a specific amount of time. Evidence suggests that assembly occurs most frequently by means of an organized mobilization method, but can also occur by impromptu process, such as word of mouth by non-official organizers. The temporary gathering. In this phase, individuals are assembled and participate in both individual and collective actions. Rarely do all individuals in a crowd participate, and those who do participate do so by choice. Participation furthermore appears to vary based on the type and purpose of the gathering, with religious services experiencing greater participation. The dispersing process. In the final phase, the crowd's participants disperse from a common location to one or more alternate locations. A riot occurs when one or more individuals within a gathering engage in violence against person or property, according to U.S. and European research data from 1830 to 1930 and from the 1960s to the present. Less than 10% of protest demonstrations have involved violence against person or property, with the celebration riot as the most frequent type of riot in the United States. Elaborated social identity model. A modern model has also been developed by Steve Riker, John Drury, and Dr. Clifford Stott, which contrasts significantly from the classic theory of crowd behavior. According to Dr. Clifford Stott of the University of Leeds, the ESIM has at its basis the proposition that a component part of the self-concept determining human social behavior derives from psychological membership of particular social categories. Crowd participants also have a range of social identities which can become salient within the psychological system referred to as the self. Collective action becomes possible when a particular social identity is simultaneously salient and therefore shared among crowd participants. Stott's final point differs from the submergence quality of crowds proposed by Le Bon. in which the individual's consciousness gives way to the unconsciousness of the crowd. ESIM also considers the effect of policing on the behavior of the crowd. It warns that the indiscriminate use of force would create a redefined sense of unity in the crowd in terms of the illegitimacy of an opposition to the actions of the police. This could essentially draw the crowd into conflict despite the initial hesitancy of the individuals in the crowd.